Hey there everyone, welcome back to Imagination Tech. My name is Jeff. So today we are going to be building this Frelon Y6 quadcopter. Wait, that's not right. This Frelon Y6 drone. And these motors were sent in by Meps, and we are also going to do a review of these motors and see if if these are the right motors for this build. Anyway, stay tuned. So I just got a package from Meps, and these are one of their motors, so we are going to check them out. So this is the package I got from Meps, and this was sent by a DHL from China. And let's just go ahead and open this up. So inside the box we have, let's take a look at the stickers first, because I'm always a sucker for stickers. So yeah, these are really nice looking stickers, and you see the astronaut in the space theme. It's probably because these are their Meps SZ space motors. So I actually spoke with Meps, with Yuki of Meps, and I asked them if they could send me 6 motors, and they did. So first of all, thank you to Yuki of Meps for sending all of these. These should be 2306 1950 kV. So these are going to be really good 6S motors. And how do I know that they're really good? It's because I already watched Chris Rosser's detailed review of these motors, and that's actually how I found out about Meps. So let's take one of these and check out what's inside. So inside the box we have, what's this? Is this a sticker? Nope. It's just some documentation. Let's push this out. So it has these nice silicon wires, and and it comes in this bright neon green 2306. As you can see, this is an SZ2306 1950 kV space motors, and I think these are just the screws. Yep, these are the screws, and this is the prop nut and some silicone gel for a good measure. So let's just put that aside and take a closer look at this. So our 2306 motor has a screw for the bell, so that's really nice, because I really hate C-clips, so in case you need to clean out your motors or replace your bell, that's going to be an easy thing to do with these with this motor bell, with this screw on the motor bell. So let's just go ahead and unscrew one of these things. Motors are quite strong and having a really hard time pulling them apart. So let's see if this will work. I screwed it onto this spare arm for my Ummagawd, and it's really hard to remove. So it's really stuck on there. I'm not sure if there's something else that I need to loosen, because I've already removed the screw. It's really not coming out. It's well and stuck. So I don't want to break this motor just yet, because I'm still going to put this on a build. So maybe if you've taken one of these apart, then let me know in the comments. In the meantime, let's go ahead and see if we can put this onto our build. Before we proceed on our build, let's address the elephant in the room. Meps has been at the center of controversy, especially back in May, And this started when Fly High FPV posted a negative review, which Meps King didn't like, and all of the Meps King marketing came out on their on that post. And everyone started fighting. It was basically a flame war of people who were calling the Meps King marketing people as shills, and those who gave positive reviews of the Meps King motors as as shills of the company. And Meps King also accidentally, I believe it was accidental, they published Fly High FPV's personal data, including the address, on their website, which has already been removed. And they've also been accused of ripping off articles and putting it on their website, and just the motors were changed, for example, if it was a build article. And I believe Meps King already has learned a lot of lessons from this. First of all, not to post personal data of some of other people. They've also ramped up with their with their blog, with their marketing, because now they're actually asking people to write for them. So that's a good it's a good change. And with regards to restrictive contracts, I'm not sure if the earlier reviewers got a more restrictive contract, but on mine it says that I could give a fair review of the motors that they sent me. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And in the first place, before this controversy ever happened, Chris Rosser already did a good job on his bench, really tested these motors, got a lot of really useful numbers out these motors. So I'm just gonna link to that video, probably post it somewhere here or down in the description, and you should definitely check that out, because if you're into data, if you're into numbers, then you'd really like that video by Chris Rosser. That's how I came into contact with Yuki of Meps King, and I asked if if they were going to send me some motors, then make it 6, because we are going to be putting it on the Frelon Y6. So both the 2306 and 2207 motors are, efficient motors, and they're not really like, top-end performing motors. They're more of the middle-of-the-road motors. That's exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for efficient motors, and the reason why I got the 2306 over 2207, the 2306 is slightly less powerful than the 2207, less torque. But I wanted the 2306 because I wanted something that was really, really short, and that was because I was going to put these on this Frelon Y6 frame. So I'm going to have 2 motors, on these arms, and they're going to be coaxial. And I just didn't want really something that was really, really chunky and really tall, because I'm going to have a motor on top and a motor on the bottom, and that having a short motor would mean that's not going to be so thick. Looking at this side by side with this Razor Star SICK 2207 motor, which is a premium motor that was made by, well, it's not really made by Razor Star. It was marketed by Razor Star, but they had someone else make this. Probably say, Kebab FPV thinks that it's the same factory that makes the iFlight premium motors. So you can see that the height difference, there is a significant height difference with these 2 motors. So this 2207, unfortunately, I can't do a side-by-side because this is a 4S motor and this is a 6S motor. This has 2688 kV. But yeah, I was planning to put, these, I have 8 of these motors, so I'm planning to put this on the Frelon as well, and maybe see a side-by-side comparison, or not really a side-by-side, but do a comparison of how the Frelon flies on either of them. So both of these motors have 9mm motors, which are pretty standard now for these kinds of motors. So they have 9mm bearings, and they're both they both have screws on the bottom, so you can remove the Unibell. This Unibell is stuck though, but thankfully Chris Rosser already deconstructed his, and we can just take a look at the picture of that. I also have this iFlight Sing 2208. So this is a really, really tall motor. These are the motors that I have on my tricopter, and you can see really the height difference of these. These are really, really tall. So imagine if I was going to put these here, I was going to have another 2208 at the bottom. That's going to be really, really big. It's also a little bit heavier. So most of the flack that Meps is getting with these motors is that Meps is marketing this as Unibell motors, and some pilots are saying that these are not really Unibell motors because they have a separate magnet ring here, and this is just like the outside aluminum. So Meps also, they destroyed one motor just to show you, how it looks like. And it's true, this aluminum, this yellow, outer shell, this is one piece. So this is a Unibell. And then this piece here, this is the magnet ring or the flux ring, whatever you want to call it. This is a separate piece. Meps is not the only one who's, doing this kind of motor bell. In fact, another premium brand, RC in Power, has the exact same style of Unibell motors. I think it's the Smooks motor. I'm not really sure. Yeah, they have the aluminum outer housing, the aluminum bell, and then they have a separate magnetic ring, which is just the cylinder. It's not just RC in Power. There are a lot of motor manufacturers who have Unibell motors, and that's how they do it. Exactly the same thing as Meps. There are exceptions, of course, like this Sing Unibell motor that I showed you earlier. This whole bell, this was made, and look how thick that bell is. And then the magnets are, stuck here, so they don't have a separate magnet ring. But calling Meps, a liar because they have a separate magnet ring to hold the magnets, and saying that this is not a true Unibell. So let's put that to rest. This is a Unibell, not just because Meps says so, but because a lot of other motor manufacturers who claim they're Unibell also does the same thing. And you don't see any problem with people having a problem with those motors when they say they're Unibell. So they don't have an issue with RC in Power or any of those other manufacturers when they produce something like this. The T-Motor Pacer as well is also a Unibell, and it also has the same same style. It has the outer aluminum bell, and then there's an inner magnetic ring. So it's all the same.
We have a steel flux ring, high strength magnets, and it's a Unibell design. You can see that the bell extends all the way down over the flux ring to minimize the risk of slipped magnets.
Now, another criticism is that these mounts, they say that these are going to cut into the carbon fiber. Again, this is not unique to the Meps motors. The T-Motor Pacer as well, the T-Motor Pacer version 2, also has this elevated style of motor mounts. Again, if you ask people who are using T-Motor Pacer motors, they don't have an issue with it cutting into the carbon. I would say that the T-Motor Pacer V2s have a thicker motor mount or screw mount. I'm not really sure what it's called. So it's less likely to to cut into the carbon fiber frame than this one. But there are solutions to that. Just don't over torque them. It's the same tip you get for T-Motor Pacers as well. And you can also just soft mount them. Get one of these 3D print one of these TPU soft mounts and mount it like that, and problem solved. So most of these criticisms are coming from pilots who are just hating on Meps, and if you give a fair review of the Meps motors, they're going to call you a shill. For them, a fair review of a Meps motors is a negative review. But as far as I can see, Meps isn't doing anything much different from other motor manufacturers with their Unibell design. And let me just say, straight out here, as Imagination Tech, I agree, this is a Unibell design. Chris Rosser, deconstructed this. He had no problem that Meps is calling this a Unibell design. So, anyone else who says this is not a Unibell design can just mind their own business. For our stack, we are going to be using the SpeedyBee F405 V3, and we also need another 50 amp ESC. So this is a great electronic stack because aside from SpeedyBee being a manufacturer of really good electronics, this flight controller has a 2 amp BAC. It has an onboard voltage meter, and you can also configure Betaflight via the SpeedyBee app over Bluetooth, so you don't even need to connect this to your computer. And I'll post a link to these in the description below, and so that you can check that out and possibly buy them. Now this is just the 50 amp ESC, and this is exactly the same as this one. Now the reason why this makes it perfect for our Frelon Y6 build is because over here you have your motor 5 to motor 8 pins, so you don't have to fiddle around with an LED strip or PPM. You can just, whether you're building an Y6 like we are, or you're going to put this on an octocopter or an X4 or X8 sin lifter build, is going to be the perfect stack for you. Now, if you don't have one of these stacks and you're just using another flight controller, there is a way to use, to get Motor 5 and Motor 6 output via the LED strip. I think this has an LED strip as well as a PPM pad, but again, that's a little bit more resource allocation, resource mapping in Betaflight, so that's a little bit more work. So we are going to be using this stack on our Frelon Y6 build. The ESC came with these, and the FC stack came with all of these, so this is going to be most of what you're going to need for any build that you're planning on. For the front ESC, I used these 30mm M3 screws that came with this PDB stack. And I also had to, raise this this board up because of these nuts that were stagging onto the underside of the pads. So I just used these stack of 3 hex nuts that you can use if you have some extra gummies or extra standoffs to, just to act as a spacer. Now the back ESC didn't have that problem, so you could just mount it with just regular M3 screws and just mount it straight to the board. And our flight controller is going here up on top. I've cut the motor wires short, and I'm just going to connect these to some MR30 connectors so that we can easily swap out motors. Now my motor wires are nice and short and around 1.5 inches, and we are going to do this to all of our motors. We're done with our motors, so now we need to attach the other side of the MR30 connectors using the wires that we got from cutting these motors. ESC number 1 is wired to our flight controller using this included wire harness that came with this stack. But for ESC number 2, we are going to have to solder ground as well as motor 5 and motor 6 to one of these 4 motor pads. Since we're going to be laying our ESC number 2 like this, we're probably going to be using this ESC, which is number 4, as well as this ESC, which is number 2. So that means we have to solder on to ground, and then we're going to skip the bolts, the VBAT, and then skip motor pad 1 and then 2, and then skip number 3, and then onto pad number 4. Now we solder on some extra wires that we have onto the pads. And then we pass the wires underneath the board and then soldered it on top to their respective pads. I made the MR30 plugs from the wire left over from the motors, and I'm just going to cut these in half. We're going to solder this onto our ESC. Here's a quick preview of how we're going to solder it up. So we have one MR30 connector on top of each arm, and then we have an MR30 connector on the underside of each arm. So here it is with all of the MR30 motor plugs soldered onto our ESCs. But before we plug in our motors, let's first connect a receiver, VTX, and camera to our flight controller. Just a quick note, you need to flip one of your ESCs. In this case, I flipped my back ESC around just so that the positive and the negative of both ESC boards line up, or else we're going to have a really bad time. The Frelon came with these 2 TPU parts that came with a package, but there are also several other options that you can choose from, and you can print this on your own. You can download the files from Thingiverse, or you can order it directly from LOOOOT, such as this antenna mount. This is for your Crossfire Immortal T antenna, which mounts at the back standoff of your Frelon, and you can either have your antenna mounted vertically or horizontally. So these are all personal preferences or aesthetic choices that you may have to make. There are also several options for depending on what kind of antenna that you have. These are for a single SMA antenna for analog systems. There are also other mounts for a DJI Vista or something like that. There are also different sizes of these GPS mounts. Like this one for a BN880 or BE880, the 220, and this is for the M8Q, and this is for the BN220 sized GPS. And there's also some third-party makers who are creating these things. This one is particularly interesting because it has a GoPro mount, so this replaces this part. But it also has the GPS mount right here at the back. It also has space for a Wi-Fi finder too. And you can also print the button to turn that off when the beeper is going off. So aside from these essential things, you can also create or print have different different pods printed out. So these comes in different varieties depending on what camera you have and or different size cameras you have. And I printed this out also for aesthetic purposes, because I printed it in multicolor. And there's also several options. Again, if you want your Immortal T antenna mounted at front, there's also a pod variation that has an Immortal T antenna mount up here. And so yeah, it's really up to you what kind of personal preference or what parts that are available to you. And just check it out. I'll link the files to the Thingiverse in the description below. Aside from having 8 motor outputs, what I really like about this PDB flight controller is that it's really well laid out. It's quite clear where you can solder things, and everything is labeled, so it's really easy to solder to. So I've already soldered all of my components onto the board, and I'll just explain all of the wirings. So here we have our camera here with 5 volts ground and the camera video in. There's another pad for if you have a camera that supports OSD control, so you can use that. I have my crossfire wired here, and that's ground, 5 volts, RX and TX. Over here at the bottom we have our VTX, and if your VTX requires, like this one has a 7 to 26 volt voltage range, there's a 9 volt pin here which I'm using, and then there's ground, and there's your VTX video pad and your smart audio pad, which is TX on UART1 or T1. Over here we have our GPS mounted to 5 volts ground, and then the TX and RX pin. If you're using something like a BN or BE 880, which also has a compass, there are 2 pads here which you can solder onto, and that's for the compass. Something you might want to consider doing earlier on in your build is to attach these capacitors, because I soldered them onto the underside of these boards. It's not impossible to do, it's just a little bit challenging because I had to solder it underneath. But yes, these capacitors came with the PDB ESCs. Also, it conveniently came with these heat shrinks, and there are through holes here on the ESCs. So you just have to. I just slotted them in. Didn't shorten the legs that much because I wanted them to lay here. So yes, that's something that you need to solder onto the underside. And now for the challenging part is to solder on this our XT60 Pigtail in a way that we are able to solder onto both ESCs at the same time. So this is going to be challenging, so let's go ahead and give it a try. Not the prettiest, but I think it'll work. On the left is the GoPro mount that came with the Frelon, and on the right is something I printed with my Kangaroo KP3S, which I also have a video of. So here on the left you can see that there's these circles, and it's filled with this with the same material. This is supposed to be a support material, and it's supposed to be removed. So you can see here that in my print I already have it removed. In fact, I didn't print the support material because of how my printer is calibrated. But even if you print out the support material on your 3D printer, you're supposed to remove that. And depending on your settings, it can be difficult to remove, which is why you're not supposed to be shipping a product with the support material still intact, because I already tried removing this with my long nose pliers, with a cutter. It just won't, you just can't really get it out. So that's the only reason why I printed it out. I mean, I was pretty happy with the black print, but since I couldn't get this out, and this recess is supposed to be where some of your stack screws are supposed to go into. So since these won't come out, this is basically an unusable part. So I would say that it's a quality control issue. If you are a bigger company and you're shipping out TPU parts with this not hollowed out, then I think that's a really important thing. It's a really big thing, because especially if you're not doing 3D printing, you don't know how difficult these things are to remove. So yeah, that's not something I like. We're all finished with the internals, and I've already mounted all of these TPU parts as well as my custom Frelon pod. If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you hit that like button and also make sure that you are subscribed. Alright, on to the next. As with most modern FPV motors, the Meps King motors come with these 8mm socket head screws. So that's great for, you know, for usual frames that have like 4 or 5mm arms like this. So, you know, it's just the right length. However, for this Frelon frame with these motor mounts, these are really too thin. So if you are going to be using you can't use the motors that come with the screws that come with the motor because they're too high. So these screws are not included with the package, and you have to source your own. I think these are 4mm screws and they're just the right length. So you're going to have to source this on your own. So we've screwed on one of our motors onto the motor mount, and make sure that you leave one of these screws because they're under the wires and it's pretty hard to, you know, get in there. Now, in many of the builds for this Frelon frame, these motor mounts are mounted on the underside of the arm, and that is because you know, it's to lower the arms so that they're not sticking out too much. But again, you have your stack mounted on your top plate and your battery on your bottom plate, so you know it doesn't really make a difference anymore with this small. I think this is a 2 or 3mm height difference. So I would rather put this on top because even if the screws come loose, this motor mount is sitting on top of the arm, so you know you have gravity going on for you. Whereas if it's mounted here at the bottom, and you know for some reason the screws come loose, or the screws or the nuts come loose, then this is going to fall straight off because of gravity again. So I'd rather have this here on top, and you know even unscrewed, it's not going to fall, unlike if you screw it here on the bottom, where you know you just need to loose any one of your nuts or your screws and you're done for. And for the bottom motor, we can just use the screws that were included in the Meps motors. Just slide that in there and just, you know, screw that on. And once that's all done, we can just slide these in, put on these screws. Once again, I have the socket head of the screw on top, so even if the nut falls, you know, I still have gravity going on for me. Again, if I had mounted this under here and the nut comes loose, then I could lose a screw. So you know, I'm just hedging my bets, making sure that, you know, I have physics going on for me. I mean, it's not going to be the best in terms of you know, it's a little bit elevated compared to the stack, but I mean, this frame, the center of gravity is all over the place anyway, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. So I'd rather, you know, think about the safety of my build. So this is how it's going to look like with both of the motors mounted on top and the bottom. And now we're just going to do it for the other arms. Make sure you don't forget to put the soft mounts if you're planning to do so, and as well as using thread locker on your screws before tightening everything up. And now that we've already screwed in everything, we just need to plug everything in, connect our peripherals, and then connect this to Betaflight. I also secured the motor wires with some zip ties so they're nice and tidy. So let's try putting this on the scales, see how much it weighs. And it comes out around 448 grams, almost 450 grams, which is doesn't include the props and the batteries, but it's all built up. And it's quite surprising that it's that light considering it has 6 motors. So just in comparison, let's try putting our Ummagawd Remix V2 over here. This one has props and this GoPro mount, but it comes out around 483 grams. I think this mount is probably maybe 30-50 grams. So considering this has just 4 motors, it's quite surprising actually that that the Frelon is quite that light. And you know, just in comparison, let's just see how much our Cinebot 30 weighs. This one is lightweight, so shouldn't weigh too much. Yeah, so this is 250 grams without the battery as well, but with the Hawkeye 4K thumb, which I have a review video of, which you can check down in the description below. So yeah, it's pretty light considering all things considered, and since we have six motors on here, which is going to give us a pretty nice thrust to weight ratio. Let's start up Betaflight and plug in our flight controller to our computer. And the first thing you'll need to do is to make sure your Frelon is on a level surface and click Calibrate Accelerometer. Notice the 3D model was upside down because our flight controller is mounted upside down on our top plate. Next, we head on over to the Ports tab. Serial RX is already set to UART2 where we have our receiver connected. Our VTX is wired up to UART1, so under Peripherals, we set it to TBS Smart Audio. Our GPS is hooked up to UART6, so under Sensor Input, we set it to GPS. We're not going to be using ESC telemetry, so we disabled it. Click Save and Reboot. We then go to the Configuration tab and under Board and Sensor Alignment, we set Roll to 180 degrees because that's how our flight controller is mounted. We disable Magnetometer because we don't have one, but we'll keep Barometer on because our SpeedyBee flight controller has one built in. I'm just going to name this Hornet. Under Drone Beacon, I like to have RX Lost and RX Set enabled even if I'm going to have a beeper installed anyway. Maximum arming angle is set to 180 degrees. In-flight accelerometer calibration because I like to calibrate it every now and then. For GPS settings, we set it to uBlocks, Autobot, AutoConfig, use Galileo, as well as set home point once, and then click Save and Reboot. Going into the Motors tab under Mixer, most of you who fly only quads probably have never touched this before, but we're going to choose Y6 at the very bottom of the list. As you can see, the motor order starts from the top side motors 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6 for the bottom mounted motors. We'll need to click Save and Reboot first, then go to the Motors tab later. But first on the Setup tab, move your Frelon on all its axes and check if the 3D model is moving the same way. If you're enjoying this video so far, consider subscribing to my channel. Back to the Motors tab, we'll also need to plug in a battery to our Frelon. Then we click on Reorder Motors, tick I understand the risks, and click Start. One of the motors will start spinning in short intervals, and you just need to click which one it is on the diagram. Note that the top mounted motors would appear near the center. We'll just do this for all motors and then click Save, which will make the flight controller reboot. Back to the Motors tab again, this time we click Motor Direction. Once again, tick I understand the risks and choose Wizard or individually, depending on your preference. Wizard will basically spin all motors at the same time, and you can choose which one to reverse direction, so I prefer choosing individually instead. With this option, you can choose which motor spin, and by holding down the button, it will keep spinning. You can now just feel with your fingers which direction the motor is spinning, and if it's not the same as the arrows on the diagram, just click normal or reverse until you get the spin right. And then we just do that for the rest and hit close when we're done. Next up, let's set up our VTX from the Video Transmitter tab. Here we'll need to load up the correct VTX tables, or the easier way would be to go to the Presets tab and just look for a preset for the VTX you're using. In my case, I just searched for TBS Pro 32, clicked on that, and clicked Pick, Agree, then Save and Reboot. If we check the Video Transmitter tab, you'll see that the VTX tables are now loaded and the power levels are also properly set for our VTX. I prefer having low power disarm until first arm selected, and I will set my preferred band, channel, and power setting here as well before clicking Save. For modes, this will mainly boil down to your personal preference, so I'll just fast forward this where I set my arm, angle for emergencies, beeper, and turtle mode, and click Save. For OSD, I'm just going to paste into CLI the same OSD I have on my other quads and type in Save. Then I head back to the OSD tab to make sure everything looks right. Note I have 3 different OSD profiles I can switch between with a switch, and I have a video about how to set this up linked in the description. Finally, we enable Expert mode so we can get into the Failsafe tab, and from here we just set our failsafe to GPS rescue. I like setting my minimum distance to home to 50 meters, which is the lowest setting. Allow arming without fix, and also lowering the minimum satellites to 5. Now we just click Save and Reboot. Since we have a SpeedyBee stack, any changes we need to do, we can set up in the field with the SpeedyBee app. Out in the field, first we fly it in LOS just to see if the motors would get hot. Since the motor stayed pretty cool, it was time for its first FPV flight, and you could see that this was cruising along happily at just 15 to 20% throttle. And that likely has something to do with its high thrust to weight ratio. I'm showing you some DVR footage so you can see exactly how this thing flies, even at stock tune. Here's some footage from the GoPro as well so you can hear how the motors sound like. It really flies stable in the air, and you really feel in control whether you're flying slow and smooth or pulling off some freestyle moves. And because of its long flight times, I bet we can do some long range and mountain surfing with this as well. Pulling out of dives is no problem with this thing as we have plenty of power in our 6 motors. This is now probably my second favorite quad, but the noise levels probably aren't gonna endear me to any of my neighbors. Overall, I'm really liking this Frelon Y6 with these Meps motors, so do check out where you can get some of these as well as the rest of the parts of our build down in the description below. I think I got some dirt on one of my motors, but still spinning pretty nicely. So we'll just get that cleaned up. At the risk of breaking something, I have removed one of the propellers just to see if this Y6 will fly, you know, with a failure of one propeller or one motor. So let's just set this to angle mode and go a safe distance away. As you can see, it's still flying. So as you can see, it flew perfectly fine. The motors aren't really hot. Yeah. So even if you lose one propeller and one motor, not sure what will happen if you lose more, but at the very least, if you lose one propeller and one motor, you're still going to be able to fly. So yeah, that was quite a terrifying experience with the Maiden of this Frelon Y6 build. The motors and the props were quite loud. It's obviously it has 6 motors and 6 props, so it's at least 50% louder than your typical quad. The frequency of the noise is a little bit lower, probably because of these bi-blades on top. But yeah, performance-wise, I was quite surprised because we are on stock filters, stock PIDs, but it flew quite nicely, quite stable. I was pretty concerned at first, that's why I flew this line of sight, did a couple of seconds hover, but the motors weren't warm at all, they were just lukewarm. So yeah. So shout out to Ludo Trace for creating this Y6 frame that's accessible to a lot of people. This comes in a variety of different sizes from 2-inch all the way to 10-inch. And also shout out to Meps King and Yuki for sending these motors, because these really look great on these 2306 motors really look great on this Y6, and I really think that the efficiency of the motors really helps out. We've got good flight time on this thing. I think we did more than 5 minutes. I'm not sure. I'm just going to do some more testing on that, on how long we can fly this, cruise this, as well as if we do freestyle. But yeah, this is a really solid build. At 450 grams dry weight, it is pretty lightweight considering it has 6 motors and has plenty of thrust even with these motors, which are not really meant for top grade performance, but since we have 6 of them, we got a lot of power, you know, in this thing to spare. So, and yeah, I'm just going to leave you with that before I break this thing. But I'm going to leave you with some more flight footage from this Frelon Y6 build. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you thought that my review of these motors was fair enough. And I am going to leave you that. If you like this video, click at that like button down below. Make sure you're subscribed. And as always, keep building and keep flying.